Prime Minister, do you really understand the impact of freezing and making this decision? Do you think you're going to hit this 1.5 million target over the course of this Parliament?
So these are people who will never own their own home, that people have to rent because they can't afford to.
Hear me out on the.
I did the brilliant Labour Party MP, Florence Esholomi, epically call out Keir Starmer on the housing crisis on the 19th of December 2024 in the Liaison Committee meeting. Now what I mean is, Florence got on about the freezing of the local housing allowance.
We are in a housing crisis, and so I'd be grateful if you could explain to the committee why you took the decision to freeze the local housing allowance rate this year.
Well, we are in housing crisis, you're absolutely right. The way out of that crisis is actually to ensure that we've got a sufficient number of homes, roofs over people's heads in all the areas that are needed, which is one of the major drivers of the housing crisis that we're in, and that's why we've been clear in our ambition to build homes, 1.5 million homes over the period of this Parliament, and within that to make sure that there's a significant number of affordable homes. So that's, I completely accept the definition of a housing crisis. We need to make sure that we have the wherewithal to get out of that crisis.
Just on that, you've talked about homes. In less than a week, most of us in this room will be able to spend Christmas with our loved ones in a warm, safe home. But yet 160,000 children are going to wake up on Christmas Day in temporary accommodation. And there was a feature on the BBC News last night, on News at 10, which showed the reality of people paying thousands of pounds for temporary accommodation, which was frankly overflown with sewage. This is the reality people are facing, Prime Minister. And most of them are only in this situation because they lost the safety net of the LHA freeze. And the ONS data yesterday showed that average rent rises is going up by 9.3% in the private rented sector. Prime Minister, do you really understand the impact of freezing and making this decision?
Yes, and can I just take out, I mean, the numbers you quote to me on homelessness and temporary accommodation are appalling. That is what we've inherited, and you will have seen that just in the last week or two, the Deputy Prime Minister's set out the further money we're putting into dealing with homelessness and temporary accommodation, and the money that she's putting into local councils, and the initiatives that we are supporting. The Mayor of Manchester, for example, has been bearing down on homelessness, as you know. We want to build on that around the country, and that's why we put that money aside. But yeah, it's a terrible inheritance.
But
it's record numbers.
Yeah,
and
but
it's
Prime Minister,
shocking.
do you understand that the additional funding to address homelessness is effectively redundant if you're not dealing with the root cause of why people have been forced into temporary accommodation, including freezing the LHA allowance?
Well, we've got to put the money in to support them in the homelessness and the temporary accommodation, and that is what we're doing. And these figures have been very high for a long time. We've inherited them, and we need to turn them around.
We are very grateful and we welcome the government's ambition in terms of new homes, but these figures that you've quoted, that 1.5 million, they have to be deliverable. You may be aware, Prime Minister, that new dwellings dropped this year, and the number of planning permissions, again, the number of planning permissions granted also fell by 15%. So earlier on you talked about planning reform, you talked about regulation, additional powers for councils. This is only part of the jigsaw in building that. There is a big lag across the supply chain. We don't have the raw materials, we don't have the skilled workforce. So in light of this, and coming back to your ambition and the government's ambition, do you think you're going to hit this 1.5 million target over the course of this Parliament?
Yes, that's why I set it out. I accept it's difficult, I accept it's stretching, but it's hugely important. A home is a base camp for the aspirations and opportunities of all individuals and all families, a safe and secure roof over their head. Amongst the reasons, you're quite right about the numbers this year of houses that haven't been built because the targets were put up and then they were taken down. We've put the targets back up and made them mandatory. We've been really clear that this has to be locally led, so that it's for those within the locality to decide how they're going to comply with the targets, and if they can do so, then all well and good, no need for any intervention from government. If they can't, then we will intervene and push forward. We've been really clear that if it's a brownfield site, then it's a yes by default on planning. That's something that hasn't been there before. And we're also equally clear that we'll make use of the grey belt where it's necessary to do so. That's disused car parks, petrol stations, etc. But we intend to, and the planning reforms, obviously you'll have seen the consultation ended and the framework was issued just a few days ago. These are all the ingredients, in my view, that have been missing and why we haven't been building homes. 1.5 million is ambitious. It hasn't been done for decades. It's desperately needed. You know, and I also know we've got to punch through this because everybody says to me, government needs priorities. Of course it does. As soon as we put priorities up, then everyone says, well, what have you left out? It's unachievable. I don't accept that. I think this is an achievable target, difficult though it is, and we're determined to achieve it.
And again, we commend that, we welcome that, but do you think it's right then that the government haven't set targets in terms of how many homes they'll deliver a year? They haven't set out what tenure those homes will be, but yet you're asking local councils to report back on their targets. Another thing that's coming up, which we've looked at in our committee, is the fact that the skill force and the sector are not able to cope with helping the government build that. Again, coming back to my question, do you really think you can hit that target?
Yes, I do. And just on the targets, the way in which we've done it is to say, here's the mandatory target for each area. We want each area to decide for itself how it's going to meet those targets. What's the mix that they want? Where do they want it? It needs to be locally driven. And so at the first instance, we want that to be the way in which it gets delivered. But what we're not going to tolerate is where that doesn't happen and there isn't a plan put forward to meet the targets, that we're going to leave it as nothing happens. And at that point, the government will intervene. So that's why we're not, as it were, saying in each and every area, you must have this number of houses on that point there, because we don't want to do it in that way. We want it to be local plans. But we're being equally clear that if we don't get the local plans that meet the targets, then yes, there will be levers that we will pull centrally to make sure that that housing is delivered. Yes, of course, that means we've got to work on the supply chains. Yes, of course, it means we've got to have the skills in place. But that's why you need a priority. That's why you need a sense of driving mission to bring this together. And amongst my jobs is to chair the stock takes of the work we're doing, to get the various players around a room like this, to make sure that we've got the skills, the supply chains, the numbers, the targets, with an assessment of where we are on the data. And that's the way we'll drive through this. But I'm not going to be a defeatist on this and say it's impossible to get the supply chains. I don't accept that. I'll be defeatist and say we're never going to get the skills. I don't accept that. Do I accept it's a stretch? Do I accept it's ambitious? Yes, I do. But we're determined to do it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to pick up, Prime Minister, because in response to Ms Esholomi, when she was talking about not lifting the local housing allowance so that people can afford a home of their own, you said, and I may slightly misspeak with quoting you, you said something along the lines of, we are putting money in to support people in temporary accommodation. That leaves an impression that you're supporting people in temporary accommodation over supporting people into permanent homes. I just wondered if that's what you meant to say, or if you'd like to clarify that point.
No, we're doing both.
Okay, so you're going to lift the local housing allowance? The
I'll give you the details of the money that we laid out a few days ago.
Yeah, we know about the money for temporary accommodation, but it was the local, perhaps Ms Esholomi,
so
give it one more.
Essentially, the additional funding that councils have received is going to be absorbed because rents are going up higher, and this is forcing families up and down the country into temporary accommodation for much longer. We shouldn't be calling it temporary accommodation, Prime Minister. People are there for 14, 15 years.
Prime Minister.
Yeah, I absolutely understand that. And that is because, or amongst the reasons for that, and the drivers for that, are because the average age for owning your own home now is over 35 years old. And so many people...
So these are people who will never own their own home, that people have to rent because they can't afford to.
Hear me out on the rents have gone through the roof.
Yeah.
Because the competition for rented accommodation is through the roof. It's through the roof because we haven't been building enough houses, and therefore too many people want the same accommodation. It means the landlords put in a prime position.
Yeah,
But we know, we know,
know
Prime
that.
Minister, we know all that. So yes, but what about the local? So you're ruling out completely lifting the LHA because that would help some people get their own homes rather than the temporary accommodation that Mr. Esholomi
All of that has been set out in the budget, and we're not unpicking the budget.
Now, from what I've read, local housing allowance determines what housing rates and universal credits you can receive to cover your housing costs. Rates, they were reduced in 2011 to the 30th percentile, whatever that means, and since 2013 they've been linked to CPI, which from what I can gather, I think it might mean Consumer Price Index, and the pandemic that had frozen LHA rates, leading to significant shortfalls between housing cost support and actual rent costs for many. Apparently the average monthly gap between LHA and rent costs in Britain is £62.13, but most housing benefit and universal credit claimants report a monthly shortfall of over £100, and debt clients on universal credit report an average shortfall of £145. And also, rent increases are causing thousands of people to experience homelessness, causing hardship and impacting on their mental health. And LHA inadequacy and complexities are also causing people to use other income or to cut back on essentials. There's also the hidden housing tax on low-income households that need to be addressed by restoring the link between the LHA and local rent costs, reforming national limits on LHA rates, returning the SAR, which I looked up and all I could seem to find that I wondered if it means subject access request, upper age limit to 25, and increasing funding for discretionary housing payments or DHPS. And from what I've also read about the UK housing crisis, that can be addressed by delivering more social rented homes, obviously, funding housing to meet local needs, investing in housing benefits, ensuring decent standards, protecting tenants from eviction, and providing support for homeless individuals. So what do you guys think? Was Florence Esholomi fantastic, or was Keir Starmer right? Also, if I missed anything out about local housing allowance and housing crisis that you think's important, I'm sorry, I just didn't want to babble on longer than I needed to be bored to death. But if you want to add something that I've missed out and you think's important, use the comments below, because I'm sure people will find what you have to say interesting and informative. Also, if you enjoy everything else of Commons and select committee meetings, like and subscribe, because this year my New Year goal is to try and achieve 40,000 subs by the end of the year. Tough ask, but you know, we all like a try, don't we? So it just leaves me to say, I'll leave the video here and I shall bid you farewell and take care, my friends.